Welcome to the HMO Property Show. By investors, for investors. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing. Whether you're a seasoned investor, a new landlord, or just curious about property investing, this is the podcast for you. Sponsored by the Co-Living Collective, your trusted partner in creating vibrant and sustainable shared living experiences. Visit us at colivingcollective.com.au to learn more.
Welcome back to the HMO Property Show. Today we are going back across the pond to my hometown of England. We've got HMO expert, investor, author, and software developer. It's Mr. Rick Gannon. Rick, welcome to the podcast.
Good afternoon or good morning. I don't know. What time is it where you
We've got a big time difference. Yeah, it's morning for you. It's afternoon for us. Yeah.
Good day. That's probably more appropriate, isn't it?
Good day there. That's the one, mate. That's the one. So, Rick, thank you for coming on the podcast. I've been following you for a long time, not in a stalker type way on social media. When I first got into the HMO space over here and started investing in them, I looked back in the UK quite a lot for inspiration on what other people were doing. And that's how I found you. And here we are almost a decade later on a podcast having a chat about HMOs and your journey and the success that you've had in them.
Yeah.
And I like to get people from the UK on because the HMO is a relatively new concept, specifically in Western Australia. The eastern seaboard of like Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane with them highly populated cities, it's a little bit more common over there. But Western Australia, I like to try and educate the listeners with the successes and the lessons and the challenges as well that other people have had in them as well. So although I've been following you for around a decade, Rick, how long have you actually been investing in HMOs for?
So my property journey started about 30 years ago and just doing it part-time, accidental investing, you know, the kind of stuff that everybody wants to have a little dabble with. And I went into full-time property, and that's when my HMO journey started to really get concentrated about 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago now. So investing in little bits and bobs on the side for about 30 years, and then HMOs properly full-time for about 10 years.
Yeah. What sort of stuff were you investing in pre-HMO?
Just your bread and butter stuff. We did a couple of flips. So my history is that I'm an ex-police officer. So when I was in the job, I was very conscious, always been very entrepreneurial, always wanting something a little bit more. And to be quite honest with you, Neil, the money that the police were getting paid back then when I was there it wasn't anything to write home about. So we just looked for other things. So we did a few flips. We had a couple of single lets. And I had a chain of pubs, believe it or not. It was all declared through the job. So at one point, I think I owned about 6 pubs, clubs, restaurants, those types of things. And it was all whilst I was working as a cop. So yeah, always been quite busy, always been very prepared to be out there and work just that little bit harder. But, you know, obviously if you carry on and you continue to do things like that and you've got that entrepreneurial spirit, then it pays off eventually if you stick to it.
Yeah, definitely. How did you manage to work full-time as a police officer and manage 6 venues?
My particular role in the police, I was working 6 on, 4 off. So I was working 2 earlys, 2 lates, 2 nights, and then 4 off. So I had almost like having 4 days off a week, not quite, you know, within that sort of 10-day period, but it gave me 4 days when I wasn't working in the police to concentrate on other things. So it's quite flexible, really, if you look at it in that respect. Whereas it's quite inflexible when it comes to family life and, you know, working bank holidays and what have you. So I did have quite a lot of downtime.
And why pubs and restaurants? Why not property from the get-go?
So my background is very complicated. Obviously, I'm a little bit long in the tooth now, and I'm coming like towards the end of my career. But the whole of my history, I started working at the age of 14 in a kitchen in a local restaurant as a kitchen porter, washing dishes, earning money. When all of my mates were going to the roller rink and spending money on skateboards, I was out there grafting, working, earning money. And I was working in the kitchen, and then that kitchen then promoted me to commie chef. So I was the guy that was chopping all the parsley and doing all the rubbish jobs. And I kind of then got a passion for working in hotels. So I left school and joined the army. Not many people know that. And I joined the army from what was then the Army Catering Corps. I don't think it exists anymore. And then started to work as a chef. I left the army, carried on with that qualification, went to college, became qualified as a chef, and then started to work for a northern company that then was called Greenall Whitley as a chef. I got then promoted from a chef to a relief manager. So at the ripe old age of around about 19, I was a relief manager going around looking after pubs across the country for managers to go on holiday. And then from that point, Lorraine, I met my wife when I was about 20. Lorraine was 16 at the time, working in one of the pubs. And we then decided to try and pursue a career in the pub industry. So we went off and bought our very first pub when I was about, I think I want to say 23 or 24.
Wow.
And we bought a lease. So we bought a pub on a lease option, not having a clue at all what we were doing. So we purchased this property, borrowed the money to buy the lease off our in-laws, and then purchased the actual freehold of the property 5 years later by borrowing the deposit off the owner, which was kind of a gifted deposit as well. So that was like, sort of vendor finance. We were doing all these things back then. And they had the pub that we owned at that point had a big barn attached to it. And I was approached by a local builder that said, look, I'm interested in the barn. And we weren't into property then. We didn't know what we were doing. We were kids. He said, I'll give you £100,000 for it, but only if I can get planning permission in order to be able to buy it and convert it into a house. And I'll give you £2,000 now, and you get to keep that even if I don't get any planning. And we were like, well, it's just a barn. And then like 6 weeks later, we had 90,000 quid in our bank account because he bought it from us. And we were like, wow, this is amazing. And we traded that pub for probably about 6 or 7 years. And then we set up a lease and leased it out to somebody else. And at that point, then I joined the police. So I went through my police career, having the pub in the background. And then Ben came along, my son, and Ben changed everything. So at the point of me being in the police at that point, I think I was about 3 years service. And then Ben came along, and then we found out that my son, Ben, was disabled. And I took a career break from the police and left because it was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, didn't quite know how to handle it, didn't know what to do. So I took a career break. And during that career break, we didn't really know what else to do. And we'd only really just come out of the pub game. So he said, we'll go back in it. And then we just started buying pubs with the money that we had, because we had a little bit of cash in the bank from the sale of the barns. And we ended up with about 5 pubs. Some were leased and some were freeholds. And did that for 3 years. And then we sold out all of the pubs to a pub chain. They bought us out. And then I went back in the police and finished off my police career and did about another 10 years or so, something like that. And then decided eventually that I wanted to help Ben flourish and help him achieve his dreams. And I couldn't do that whilst I was working as a cop. So eventually then decided that my career in the police was over and left and to pursue a career in property. And hence, 10 years later, here we are with about £8.5 million worth of houses and a very successful training company. So yeah, things are very, very different life now.
And the cash flow from the portfolio gives you the time to spend the time with your son and your family.
Yeah. So, things have changed a lot in the last 10 years. So this is how it kind of panned out. I came home off a busy night shift, and you'll know this if you've read my book, House Arrest. And I went in to see Ben. I think Ben was about 9 or 10 at the time. And I went and said hi to Ben and opened the door and said, how you doing, mate? You all right? And he said, no, I'm not. I've been awake most of the night wondering why I can't play football like my friends. And I was like, wow, that is just so profound, because Ben's got cerebral palsy. And for him, it means he can't use his legs at all. He can't weight bear. So he's in a wheelchair 24 hours. And at that point in his life, he was in mainstream school, and he was the only disabled kid in mainstream school. So he was the kid that was looking out the window when all of his mates were playing football. And we didn't know any better then. We wanted to put him in mainstream school because we didn't want to isolate him. We didn't want him to feel any different. And that was the pinnacle moment, Neil, when I changed my whole life, because that was then I said to Ben, right, we're going to make this happen. Don't worry, everything will be fine. And it was quite an emotional moment. So I went and spoke to Lorraine, my wife, and I said, look, we are only here once. Time is passing by. Ben's like nearly 10 years old now, and he's just asked me why he can't play football. I can't help him. I'm working shifts. I'm away at weekends. I'm away at Christmas time. I was a frontline police officer. So that meant I was the team. I was a sergeant. So I was like, me and my team would turn up. If you dialed 999, we were the frontline officers. So back then as well, I was getting a little bit older, and the prospect of jumping into pub fights on a Saturday night started to get less attractive. Each Saturday that I was on nights, it was like, dealing with kids, like, scrapping. So that was the moment. And I said to Lorraine, we need to do something different. We need to change the way we do things to help our kids. So we decided at that point that I was going to leave my job and then hopefully focus on a career in property investing. So Lorraine has started to go networking. I mean, she was quite involved in the networking fraternity back then. I wasn't. As a cop, you don't go networking. You're not that, out there as a cop. You're very institutionalized. You're a roughy-tufty cop, and you don't do that kind of stuff, Neil, as a police officer. So I was kind of like dismissing all of this networking. But she said that she'd met a guy, and he was investing in property, and I was always involved in property. We'd done flips. He already had a couple of single lets. We made a few pounds out of the pubs that we sold. And she said that he was taking houses and he was turning them into multiple occupation houses. And I didn't know anything about this. And my idea back then of HMOs was literally obtaining a warrant and smashing the door in and arresting people inside for drug dealing and prostitution. And I was like, why would I want to do that? At least in the police, I can come home and switch off. I don't want to be taking that with me and, worrying about all of that. And she said, no, just hear me out. You don't have to do that. You can have a demographic of tenants just like you and me, only people that perhaps can't afford or don't want to buy their own homes right now. So I went to a networking meeting. It was my first ever networking meeting. Never done it before. Bearing in mind, I was I was fresh from being in the police, literally a couple of days. And I was sat at the front row of this networking meeting. And I was the guy that was the body language with his arms folded and scowling. And I'm like, and I was texting the lads on the shift because I wasn't working in the police then, but they were on shift. And I was like, guess where I am? Oh, just like taking the mick out of myself for being at a networking meeting. And there was a guy in front of me, and he was talking about motivational speaking and about mindset and about energy and all of this type of thing. And I was like, I can't believe I'm here. Then all of a sudden, I started to listen. And then I was engrossed by what this guy was saying. And he was like, he's almost talking to me. There's another 50 people in the room. And I was getting everything he was saying. And I was relating to all of this. Your thoughts become your feelings, and your feelings become your actions. And, you surround yourself with positivity, and you become part and parcel of the people that you spend most of your time with. I'm like, hey, this is so right. Because as a cop, I was institutionalized. All you do is deal with the bad stuff pretty much all day. And that's the kind of person you become. And after about half an hour of this guy speaking, I was hooked. I was like, I'm networking for life.
Sign me up.
Yeah, I was absolutely loving it. And from that point, and then for the people I met in that meeting, there was another lady there actually in the meeting who was also a cop, and she was also based at the same station as me. Or I'd never met her because we're on opposite shift patterns. So she was working early, I was working nights, so we never got to meet. And she came up to me in that networking meeting and said she'd just replaced her income from investing in HMOs, houses in multiple occupancy. Now, if it's good enough for another cop, I believed cops, they were my family, it was good enough for me. And that was the point when I said to Lorraine, right, let's do this. Let's start a HMO business. Let's make this work. And it was hard, I mean, I went back and set up my little business from my dining room table with my little desk tidy next to me, my phone that never rang, a load of papers that I was just shuffling around for weeks because I didn't know what I was doing. And then all of a sudden, things started to happen. And then I would say probably within the first 6 months, took me about 6 months, I replaced my police income, which wasn't a big deal at the time, to be fair. But then within the first 12 months, I probably quadrupled my police income, which gave me the money, the network that I developed as well over social media, because I worked quite hard at that, and the time to then develop Worcester very first Howard Chaired Disability Football Club for kids. So it gave me the freedom, the time, the money, and the context to be able to enable Ben to fulfill his ambition of playing football, and 5 other kids as well. So we had Worcester Wizards. That was our football club. We we played for probably about 6 or 7 years. Lockdown kind of pretty much put paid to it, and all the kids got older and they went off and did different things. But property enabled me to help Ben fulfill his dreams, and he did. And then he went off to play for other clubs, and he got that box ticked, and property helped us do it.
So for you, property is always, it's about the impact, not the cash flow. It's about the impact.
Well, it's about both, because you can't have the impact without the cash flow. So
true.
it kind of all comes together, because I could never, I mean, the wheelchairs that we had to buy, we funded most of it through support and charity fundraising events, but the wheelchairs are like 8,000 quid each. And we had to have 5. So we had to go out there and find them. We needed a van, we needed a place to store them, you know, so it was quite a cash, it was quite hard to raise that kind of cash to be able to, you know, set it up in the first place. So the cash enabled me to give my job up, to put the time together to do the fundraising in order to be able to put everything together. So it's kind of everything, really. It's every little bit of the recipe to bake the cake.
Powerful. Good stuff, mate. You mentioned something earlier there as well. There's a few things that you mentioned. First of all, you were 23. You must have been Britain's youngest pub landlord, were you? Or one of them?
I don't know. I mean, was I 23? I mean, I'm just thinking about, I probably was. I think I was 21 when I started on the relief
Yeah,
circuit.
right.
And then, so it would have been 23, 24 when we actually bought our first pub. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't easy. Wasn't easy when you've got old boys at the bar that have been used to, you know, sort of sitting there and drinking half a pint of lager for about 5 hours and then boring the socks off. You know, it was a tough job. Being a pub landlord is the hardest thing I think I've ever done. It's harder than being a police officer.
And then the creative way that you actually purchased that pub, you actually went on to write a book later on, which is all about 45 ways to buy property as well. Was the strategy that you used to buy that pub in the book? I'm guessing it was.
Well, it kind of, because, you know, assisted sale. We purchased we kind of a lease option when we bought it, which we didn't really know what we were doing. And then we did a lease option to the builder when he bought the barns off us. So we were doing all of those strategies 30 years ago, whenever it was now, not knowing what we were doing. And we're still doing the same thing now, only a little bit more educated.
Yeah. And then the builder himself, he used a creative strategy on you. So $2,000 down, did his DD, and then purchased the block later on as well. So yeah, lots going on there that you probably didn't even pick up on, right?
We didn't know. And at the time, you know, we weren't developers. I wasn't interested in building houses, but we just had this old barn. We never used it. It was just there. And he offered us, like, I think it was 89,000 or something. And back then, you know, we're talking 30 years ago, and I was 24 years old. Lorraine was 19 or 20, and all of a sudden somebody comes and gives us 90 grand. We're like, yeah, right then. Yeah.
And something else you said, Rick, as well, was when they mentioned HMOs, you said, oh, these are the places that I normally go and take the front door of its hinges as a police officer. But then you realize the tenancy and the type of people that you could house in these. Everybody has this same kind of stigma when I talk about these kind of houses to people in Australia. But what is the reality? What sort of tenancy do you get back in England in the HMOs that you've got?
I think it's interesting. It's a good, interesting point, because it does have a stigma. But I always say it's the tenant that makes a property, not the property that makes a tenant. So when people say, oh, you know, HMOs always get bad tenants, you could equally get just about a tenant in a single let property.
Correct.
You know, you can do all the due diligence in the world, and if the tenant circumstances change, then they change. And it doesn't matter where they're living, they change no matter where they are. So let's take it back a bit. Going back to the 80s, we had these things called bed sits. And bed sits were always stereotyped as the lowest element of living for rented accommodation. And it didn't help with programs like Rising Damp and the things that were going on at the, you know, at that time, that were portraying bad landlords and, you know, and renting out properties and making loads of money. So that kind of didn't really help. Now, bed sits literally are a bedroom, a sitting room, and a kitchen. So that's like an all-encompassed one-room unit of accommodation. Now, going back to the 80s, we didn't have as much legislation. We didn't have as much control over, well, the government didn't have as much control over what people were doing. So people saw it as cramming people into houses, doing it really badly, not looking after their tenants, therefore getting this whole bad reputation of the worst type of housing. So move forward and fast forward to, let's say, 2015 or so. the market really took a massive step change. People saw this as an opportunity, but to do it better. And that's when things started to change for the better, with better housing, better amenities, better decoration, just basically stepping up the mark. And we started to see a lot more legislation. So we've got the Housing Act obviously started to get reformed and what have you. We've got the HMO management regulations that came in. We've got the mandatory licensing schemes and all of these elements that started to control what landlords did. So whilst that pushed quite a few people under the radar even further, you're always going to have that. It made everybody else step their game up. So we've got minimum room size requirements now. We've got minimum amenities standards where we have to have X amount of toilets per tenant. We've now got car parking as well that we need to supply in the UK in certain areas. So it really started to push the bad people out. And now if we look back in comparison, if you look at the quality of stock that's available now from most landlords, from 80% of people that do it well, they're like boutique hotels. You've got a room in a beautiful house with great amenities, with outdoor living space, car parking, cleaners that are getting put in there, all-inclusive bills for a fraction of the cost it would cost them to buy their own house. So they get to live in an amazing standard property for less than a third of the price that it would cost them. So things have moved on. So now we've raised that bar, everybody else raises the bar, so then we keep pushing forwards. Now we're going, to 5-star standard type hotel rooms in order to be able to stay on top of the market, which is great, and it's great for the tenant. So in terms of tenant demographic, well, that will naturally push the demographic up anyway. So we're going to the people that can only afford to rent those rooms, which means that potentially, hopefully, they're going to be good tenants. But we never know what's around the corner. Now, for those that watch my social media videos, I am known for sharing things as it is. I don't fluff anything up. If something bad happens in my portfolio, I share it. If something good happens, I share it, because it's really important to me, Neil, that I give that message out there that business isn't linear. Life isn't linear. You can't have good without bad. And there's no way you can run a property portfolio without eventually, at some point, having a bad tenant. So tenant demographic, due diligence obviously is key. Doing as much due diligence as possible, and then base it. You can only base that information on the information you've been given at the time. And then you make a decision. You take the tenant on or you don't. And if you do, then 99.9% of the time, if you do it properly, you won't have any problems. But sometimes tenant situations change. And that can then bring elements of arrears, void periods, evictions, and going through the whole process of having to remove somebody lawfully from a property because they just refuse to pay because they can't, because of their circumstances, which isn't good. And it's never nice to do that. And I'm always there to negotiate with tenants if that happens, to try and help them, to try and bring them back onto the straight and narrow, help them get onto universal credit, even though that's not our demographic. We can't kick them out because they've lost their job. And help them try and put them on a payment plan. But sadly, sometimes when tenants go down that path, they find it very difficult to communicate. And as soon as that communication gets cut off, that's when things start to go wrong. And at the end of the day, people can't continually live in a property for free. So we do have to go down the eviction route. But that's part and parcel of running a big portfolio.
Yes.
We've got 150 units. At some point, you are going to get a tenant that stops paying. But you can choose your own demographic. Now, the thing is, here in the UK, Neil, you can't discriminate against people that are working or people that are claiming benefits. So you can't advertise no DSS or anything like that, because that wouldn't be lawful. So everyone gets a shot. Everyone gets a shot at applying for a tenancy. But what we do have, and we have to have this because we are sensible business owners, is that we have to have an affordability test. So, and that's normal in the industry in England.
Do here too,
if you're, so normally ours is about 33%. So if your rent is more than 33% of your gross income, then it would be deemed as on the line. If it's more than 33%, then it would be unaffordable for you, and you probably wouldn't be able to take on the tenancy. If it's 33% or less, then it's all good. And, we know that's in that affordability bracket. And I think 33% is pretty fair, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of things that we put in place to safeguard the tenant as well, because it has to be affordable for them, and of course to safeguard our business too. And generally speaking, we get really good tenants. 99.99% of them just want to live. They don't want to be, getting involved in anything. They want to be left alone, and we afford them that privacy.
Yeah, it's interesting, Rick, because you said it doesn't matter if it's a HMO or a standard property. The same things can happen to that tenant in either of them styles of accommodation, right? The benefit of if it's in a HMO, you've still got other people paying the rent when that person does stop, and then you do evict them. You've still got income coming in. You haven't lost your income like you would do from a single let.
Well, that's the thing, because we kind of get, we have a rule of fives in our business, and my training company, I tell people that, we need a minimum of £500 a month net profit, and we need a minimum of 5 tenants. 5 tenants will take it above the mandatory licensing scheme, but 5 or above, because if you've got 5 tenants and you've got 1 void or 1 non-payer, you're still going to be in profit. If you've got 2 empty rooms, which you probably won't have because we are very busy here in the UK, then you're probably still just about in profit. If you've got 3 empty rooms, then you're at break even. So your risk level is a lot less. And as you say, if you're in a single let property, you're either full or you're empty. There's no in between.
That's it. I like the rule of 5. I'm going to make a note on that. Might use that one myself. You mentioned as well the style of accommodation has changed quite a lot. And in 2015, you're seeing a shift into what people were bringing to the market to now having 5-star boutique style accommodation. Where do we go from here, Rick? Like, what can we do to improve it even more? Like, what does the future of HMOs look like in the UK?
Well, in terms of the future HMOs, it's strong. It's always going to be strong. So let's talk about that first. I remember having a conversation, Neil, about 10 years ago, or maybe 9 years ago, with somebody on YouTube saying, oh, HMOs are over, HMOs are over. It's all about single lets, blah, blah, blah. And it was quite a heated conversation, quite a heated discussion. And here we are 10 years later, when it's not viable right now in England to go out there buying single lets because of the affordability test and because of the cash flow, unless you're in a low capital value area. It's just, the interest rates are too high to make a good profit. Whereas HMOs, obviously the interest rates are going to be commercial, they're going to be a little bit higher, but you're making way more profit because you've got multiple streams of income. Lockdown was the big test, I think, for every business, not just in the housing market, across the world. And during lockdown, I saw within a week, the minute Rishi Sunak stood up and announced all of these mortgage interest holidays and this, that, and the other, had about 17 tenants out of 150 that literally disappeared overnight. They just went back to their home countries, and I thought, well, this is it now. This is over. Maybe the industry has peaked, and it's going to start tumbling down. And 17 rooms at £500 a room or thereabouts is a lot of cash flow to try and suck up. But bizarrely, within about 4 weeks, because they opened up the letting industry in England, we were allowed to trade. We were allowed to do remote check-ins and remote checkouts, but we were allowed to trade. In about 4 weeks, we filled those rooms. And since then, we are pretty much always 100% occupied. So the rental market in the whole of England is so strong right now, and that includes HMOs. Why does it include HMOs? Why are they so popular? Well, I think there's a lot of pros and cons with HMOs. Firstly, since lockdown, certainly towards the beginning of when we opened up and the whole country started to trade again, people wanted that social aspect. They wanted to be with other people with similar, values and similar jobs. So that was the first element. And the fact that we pay all of the bills, so we pay the gas and water, electric, the fiber optic broadband, all they have to do is budget one amount every month, and that's the same. They don't have to worry about how much their bills are going to be and what their consumption levels are going to be. And some of our tenants, very much, probably about 70 or 80% of them, they're leading this transient lifestyle. They're working around maybe with jobs, they're testing what jobs they want to do. Some of them are care workers and they get moved from different companies and they get to move around the countries. And that working in those types of industries, living in a HMO will allow them that transient style of living. They can move from one place to another without having to worry about moving furniture, because we supply all of the furniture and everything that comes with it. And of course, it's affordable. So they get to live in a house. A lot of people think, well, why would you pay £400 or £450 for a room? You're not. That's just your bedroom, like you have in your house and like I have in my house. You don't live in your bedroom, and I wouldn't expect my tenants to live in their bedroom. It's just a room. They get the rest of the house to live in. They get to sit in the living room like I do at home and watch the telly. They get to go into the kitchen and cook their dinner like I do. They get to sit in the garden like I do, So to do that for a fraction of the price of renting their own property, it's a very affordable lifestyle. It'll give them the opportunity to save up towards their own mortgage if they want to. So they're not paying £1,200 a month in rent, they're paying £450 for effectively the same property if they're prepared to share. So it works so well for people that are on a budget, looking to save towards their first house and don't mind that community style living.
Yeah, so affordability, connection, and convenience.
Yeah, and transient lifestyle again, if people are, we get a lot of graduates, postgraduates, and sometimes if you're on a graduate type scheme, part of their new job might be on rotation where they have to work in, different areas of the offices around the country for that particular company every 6 months or so. So we get a lot of people that move around doing that kind of thing as well. We don't do students per se. We don't. When I came into the market in Worcester, it was kind of overpopulated with student landlords. So I decided that I was going to go down the working element rather than the student element. And that's kind of where we stuck.
Perfect. What about saturation, Rick? People always say to me, because we set a goal to deliver 10,000 rooms to the market by 2031. I don't know if we're going to achieve that goal, but it's our Northern Star that we're aiming towards as a business. And people always say to me, you'll saturate the market. The UK is a smaller country than Australia, as we know. There's a lot more people live there than Australia, though. But in terms of saturation, are you ever concerned about saturation in certain areas or in the UK in general?
I think the word saturation is overused and misunderstood. And I think people that don't really know how to invest in these strategies will use it and overuse it, and then look for any excuse not to get involved because they will always tell themselves that there is some what if, So yeah, those are the people that were really the negative side all the time. Let's talk about saturation. First of all, there's always room in a busy market, because if there wasn't, we'd only have one supermarket. We'd only have one restaurant down the high street. I don't know if it's the same where you are, Neil, but where most of the towns in England will have all of the estate agents pretty much on one street. We'll have all of the Indian restaurants on one street, all the fish and chip shops on one street. Well, if saturation was an issue, then they wouldn't be doing that. We'd only have one pizza shop, etc. And it's no different in the property world. There's always going to be room. All you have to do is be better at marketing and be better at doing the thing you want to do. So let's look at saturation per se. Now, if I went on to, we use a website called spareroom.co.uk in England. That's how we rent our single HMO rooms. And that is probably the biggest platform that people use for that. I know that I could go there now and look at my market and look at my competition. And 80% of my competition will be in this middle bracket. And I know they will, because I do this very regularly with my students. And this middle bracket is the bracket of wood chip magnolia wallpaper, brown teak furniture, properties that aren't made up at all. They look drab, they look unkept, they look really old-fashioned. That's my competition. That's 80% of the market. You've then got probably maybe 15% of the market that is still under the radar, that are still doing it unlawfully. They don't care. They are at the bottom end of the HMO markets. And then maybe you've got 5%, the remainder, that are at the very top of their game. And you need to be in that 5%, because we're not competing against that 80% anymore. They're out. It doesn't even factor, because we are completely the opposite. We're doing it boutique style. We're doing it up to date. We're making comfortable homes, working from home spaces, places that people really want to live. So you can imagine, if you're looking on Spare Room and you've got a set of photos, you're scrolling through, you see your brown wood chip magnolia, brown teak furniture that someone's bought from a car boot sale, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, And you scroll through, then you see a photo that pops and you look at it and you think, wow, is that HMO room? but we're going to get the lion's share straight away because everyone's going to want to book a viewing for that room and everyone is going to want to take it. And here's the thing, you can charge £50 a month more for that room and people will pay for it because everybody wants the best that their money can buy them. So you've got the two next to each other. There's no comparison. So saturation, it might be there if you want to compete with the brown wood chip magnolia teak furnishing brigade. You'll be saturated in that market. But in the top 5% market, the market is not saturated. The competition level is a lot less.
Yeah. So spend the extra money in the setup stage and you'll attract better people that pay more money.
And it doesn't have to cost that much more. When people say, well, yeah, but you have to pay. Well, first of all, you've got to invest in your business, right, in order to be able to make profit. But secondly, I mean, I could show you a set of photos. And obviously, I can't do that now on the podcast, but they're the same rooms. All you need is a different color paint, a nice colored bedspread, quilt, some nice cushions that will pop on the photo, and then a similar color photograph or picture on the wall as the cushions. So you get that, that aspect of the whole photo just comes to life. So, and maybe a nice colored rug on the floor. I mean, that's all you need to do to make it look 100% better. So you don't need to spend that much more money. It's just having that little bit of vision to be able to be good at interior design.
Yeah, I seen the tongue-in-cheek video that you did the other week about going around the property with the tin of paint, and you were just painting everything magnolia. We will get onto social media soon as well, because I mean, fortunately, that was a property that we are ripping out at the time, so I can afford to have a little bit of fun sometimes with my social medias. One thing that is changing quite a bit in Australia is the lending landscape around HMOs. We've got 4 main banks in Australia. They don't have the policy in place to lend against HMOs. They don't see the value in them. So we have to go to second and alternative lenders. But the lending landscape's changing. How has it changed in England over the years? And what did it used to be like? And what sort of LVRs and deposits did you have to put down in interest rates? And what's it looking like now?
Well, obviously the biggest thing is the interest rates, right? Long gone are the 3.5%, 4% HMO type mortgages. Now, we're looking at 6.5%, 7%. Hopefully that will start to come down this year. We do envisage that to, get a little bit easier. But the thing is, with higher interest rates, yes, we take a little bit of a pinch, but we've got multiple streams of income that can support that threshold test. So how have things changed? Well, I think at the moment, the affordability test for HMOs is probably the rent needs to be around about 1.75 times the mortgage payment. With single lets, it's about 1.5. But again, with multiple income streams, you're always going to pass that with a HMO because you've got several tenants all paying at once. Going back to loan to values and what have you. So when I started investing, it was quite common to have 85% loan to value, just putting 15% deposit down. So if you could get a deal below market value, and they really did exist back then, they still do now, but not quite as many, then you can add value to it and you can refinance at 85%. We were getting our money out on virtually every single deal, which meant that we could use it again and again and again. It's harder to do that now, but not impossible. There are some 85% loan to value products out there now, but we tend not to use them. So typically, across, it's probably very similar to where you are. We're looking at 75% loan to value. Commercial mortgages at the moment, they're between 5 and 7, depending really on what the product is. I'm hoping they are going to come down quite considerably. But in terms of how many lenders are out there, I don't really think it's that different, in the last 10 years. There's always been quite a big pool to fish in the UK for HMO products. I think the lenders are becoming a little bit more competitive now and becoming a little bit more savvy to lots of the other strategies that are coming out there, like serviced accommodation, serviced holiday lets and that type of thing, because we're seeing a lot more products now coming in for those types of mortgage. We're having some lenders now are becoming a little bit more receptive to lease option type things as well. So for example, if you purchased a property, if you took a property over on a lease option, and then let's say in 5 years' time, the market really went up in value and you put 25% worth of equity on because it's gone up in value so much, then if you get a current on-market valuation from some lenders, you can actually use that equity now as your deposit, which is great, you know, and that's a lot more forward thinking. Back in the day, you mentioned lease option to a lender, they would run a mile because they were like, oh, no, we don't do that. We know it's illegal, it's not moral, and all of this. So they're starting to become a little bit more receptive to all of these things now, but they need to because the market's changing and they need to be competitive. Something I've never really struggled with is obtaining finance, you know, all the way back from the beginning, because I always had that background of property, you know, single lets or doing flips, always had that little bit of experience. But I think there's a product out there for everybody now. There's so many different products on the market. It's just changing. The landscape changes daily.
Yeah, good. That's what's basically happening here now. There's more coming into the market. LVRs are changing. The way the value of the product's changing as well. So long may it continue. Makes it easier for our clients to invest in this and myself.
Yeah.
Let's talk about GoTenant, the property management software that you created. I know you don't own it now, but why did you feel like, because we've looked into it as well. We actually reached out to you back in the day to see if we could use GoTenant in Australia, but it was too complex to change from pounds to dollars, etc., and stuff like that. Was there some real pain points there that made you want to actually go out and set that up? Was it difficult? Was it easy? What sort of challenges did you come up against?
I never set GoTenant up as a commercial project. It was never meant to be for that. So I wanted something. So I can tell you the story. I was at a rent to rent because I did everything back in the day, right, to get my business set up. And I was at this rent to rent property. That's where I don't own the property, rent it off the landlord, and then basically sublease it or sublet it. And I was doing everything that everybody told me not to do at the time. And I was literally at the property half term, decorating. I was up a ladder with a cheese sandwich in one hand and a paintbrush in the other, painting my magnolia wood chip, I have to say.
You were part of the 80%.
Absolutely, part of the 80% back then. And I had my dog with me. I had my kids there. They were throwing KFC wings at each other. It was bedlam. The dog was like barking constantly. And I'd already advertised this property on Spare Room, even though it wasn't ready. And I was taking calls, or my phone was ringing. And I wasn't taking calls, I should say, because I was up this ladder. I couldn't, the kids were screaming in the background. It wouldn't have been professional. And I was taking calls from tenant prospects. And by the time I called them back 2 or 3 hours later, either they didn't answer or they'd found somewhere else. And I was like, I'm really missing the trick here. Now, I think I was at about 50 rooms at this point. And I was getting busy and I was doing pretty much everything myself. So I thought, well, look, I need something that can automate all of these inquiries that are coming in and go through a process. And there was nothing available. There was nothing out there back then. I think Arthur was just about being born, which is another property management package. And it was very in its infant stages. And there was nothing. So I kind of rudimentary put a load of these systems together that were available online. And I kind of made them all work in the background. So I put a HTML form together as an application form. So the tenant could give me a little bit of information about themselves before I went to the viewing. So what would happen is they would call or they would go onto Spare Room and send me a message. I would simply just text them back with a link to what we called back then the pre-qualification form. And then they would fill this form out, and then I would get a text message back from the form company that I didn't own, I had to subscribe to it, to say it had been completed. And then I'd go and look at it. And I would ask questions like, have you ever been in rent arrears? Have you ever been evicted? Why do you want to move? And if I felt that they weren't suitable, then I wouldn't even go to the viewing. Because I was thinking, well, hang on a minute, you know, agents nobody does this. Why do we go to the viewing and then work out whether they're suitable? And we've wasted all that time. No one was doing this back then. So I kind of flipped this on its head. And that started to work really well. And I was thinking, right, okay, now I want to add something that if I accept the viewing, I need to send them another text message back. And then I want the system to remind them an hour before so I don't turn up and they don't show. So I kind of used the same system and I went on to another booking site, which allowed me to do that sent them a text message, and they had to reply to the text message. If they didn't, then that system would automatically cancel their appointment. These were just simple booking sites. And I started to use this system coupled with online signatory sign forms that were back then, DocuSign, I think it was called. And I kind of put this system together that was all automated. And it took me about 4 months, up until 2 o'clock in the morning every night, just trying to link all of these systems in the background, but it worked. So I started running this system. Now, straight away, my viewings or my actual uptick in viewings to conversions dropped by about 60%. And I was like, oh my goodness, I've broken my business. This isn't, I have to stop doing this. But actually, after I gave it time, I found that the tenants that were coming through were the best tenants, and they stayed long and they paid their rent, because it really pushed away all of the people that couldn't be bothered to fill the form out, or did fill the form out and disclose something that I thought potentially would make them a bad tenant. And I operated this in my business for about 2 years, and it was perfect. It was brilliant. I even think I wrote about it in one of my books. And it was that good. I was speaking at I used to do a lot of public speaking back then. I hardly do any now, from personal choice, because I'm, sort of like a bit longer in the tooth. But I was at a conference in London, and I was on the stage, and I was talking to about 800 people. And I mentioned this little system I put together just in passing. And then during the break in the bar, I was just inundated with people like, going, what's this system? I want this system. I was like, whoa. So I said, well, tell you what, why don't I put it in the classroom and I'll teach you all together how to use it. So I did. And that was like the first systems training session that I did. And I trained people over about 2 years on how to put this system together that I didn't own. It was all just other systems, third parties tied together loosely with string in the background. And hundreds of people went through these systems programs. And one morning I got a phone call. And this is kind of how it went. It was, hi, Rick. I was on your systems training day last week, and I think it was brilliant. It was excellent. I'm not really interested in the system, to be honest. I was like, okay, well, thanks for letting me know. But we are international software developers, and we'd like to know if we can have a chat. Maybe we could do something. I was like, okay. So I went over to their head office in Oxford at the time, and I walked into this room, and I was there in my jeans and my T-shirt. I've never really been a corporate dresser. And they opened up this room, and they ushered me into this room, and there was like a massive big spread of, there was a buffet, there were televisions on the walls with like people with headsets on, 4 or 5, and I'm like, oh, wonder what they're doing here. Obviously I'm not going to be here very long. And then they came in, and then it became apparent that all this was for me. And it was like, what's going on here? And they pitched to me. So they got offices in Bulgaria, they've got coders in Bulgaria, they've got offices in Oxford. And they were like, we want to take your system and we want to 10x it, and we want to roll it out there to the masses. Beautiful. So I was like, wow, okay. So over a period of probably 12 to 18 months, we went through negotiations and contracts and everything else. And they coded, I didn't code, I'm not a developer. They coded what then became GoTenant, which was everything that I'd kind of done in one place under the code that we owned, and 100 other things on top to help people run their property business. So we had all of the getting to know you form, it became called. And then the getting to know you form, if you accepted the tenant online, you have a dashboard. It's got lists of actions that are outstanding per tenant application. And it just guides you through the whole process, from the viewing to giving the prescribed information, to sending out AST contracts, to picking up the keys, all the way through. Then on top of that, it also had a separate section to manage all of your gas safety, all of your reminders for your legislative types of things that you needed to do, a rent tracker. It linked with zero accountancy, so everything was all in one place. And we launched that. Can't remember what year now. I can't remember. And it did exceptionally well. We were helping hundreds of landlords and thousands of tenants across the country. And then I suppose we took a little bit of a turning point in my life, and my son became ill again, sadly, and developed another condition, which started to put a lot of pressure on us as a family, because he has a lot of seizures now, and probably 3 or 4 a week, which meant that Lorraine and my wife had to drop tools, go over to the hospital 3 or 4 times a week. Things started to get harder and harder. GoTenant as a business was not particularly hard to run. But then Lorraine and I started to talk about, well, where are we going in the next 5 years? What are we doing? At some point, we are going to have to retire. And again, look after the kids, or certainly look after Ben. So we decided to see if there were anybody out there that, wanted to take GoTenant, maybe a competitor that was in the market that was doing something similar, that wanted to have the right vision and the right forethought to get out there globally into the market. And we had several offers, and one of which was from the company that we eventually sold to about 3 months ago, called Coho. And Coho is the company that now will be, we're still in the throes of getting all of this tied up. We've got about another 2 months yet, because we've got a lot of customers to transition over. And then Coho will be taking the reins. So it's more of an amalgamation. So Coho will be sort of amalgamating GoTenant within their system and then running it from their system, because they've got future vision. They want to go global. They want to compete with Spare Room. You know, they're doing all of the right things, and they are probably now, I would say, the market leaders in this industry. So to sell to Coho and a company with that vision was very important to us. You know, we wanted to keep the system alive, and the baby that I created, you know, that the vision came to me up those step ladders that day when I was eating a cheese sandwich. Yeah.
We've actually spoke to Van. My team and I sat down with him. We did a Zoom call. He took us through Coho, and he told us the vision that they were looking at. So they're going to make a few tweaks for us so we can use it over here, and we're going to try and trial it for them as well. So yeah. Good stuff, mate. With the company that approached you, Rick, and said that they want to 10x it and take it global, did you have to put any more money in there, or did they fund the development of that software?
I'm under non-disclosure, so I can't give you too much information about how we did things and how we exited.
Yeah.
But in essence, it was my baby. It was my idea.
Yeah.
I don't have the skills. We went in and obviously we ran it as a business, obviously with dividends, profit shares, etc. But did it cost me any of my own money? Yeah, quite a considerable amount of money, because I contributed towards the development and the marketing. But they did all of the work. You know, it took us over a year to code it, to get it to where we wanted it to be. And we had equal splits in the business. You know, the marketing, I was the face, obviously, of the business. And of course, the idea was mine as well. So, you know, it was an equal split.
Yeah, yeah. I did see you smirk a little bit when I introduced you at the start and said software developer.
Yeah, I'm not a developer. You know, I mean, maybe back in the 1980s when I had a BBC Micro Model B, you know, I could make some fireworks go off on the screen, but that's about the limit of my ability.
Yeah. Rick, you've mentioned marketing a few times. You've mentioned social media as well. You've managed to build up a pretty substantial following on Facebook, TikTok, and on YouTube as well. I was checking through the stats last night. You got 476,000 followers on Facebook, 348,000 on TikTok, and you've had 8 million views on YouTube. Staggering.
Yeah. YouTube is probably the lowest channel. I mean, 8 million is great, don't get me wrong, but put it into perspective, in November, I had 180 million views on Facebook in just November. Yeah, social media is a big part of my business, big part of my life.
How have you used it to grow the business and build the brand, Rick Gannon?
Everything has been down to social media. You know, I wouldn't be here today doing the things that I'm doing with the portfolio that I've got and the training business that I run without social media. I think as a cop, as an individual, I am all about transparency. And I've never been that person that, you know, oh, look, you can invest in property and drive around in my £1 million supercar and walk on a beach with my flowing linen trousers and my shirt off. I'm not that person, right? And don't get me wrong, you can do that. You can do that in any industry if you're successful. But for me, it's all about, look, I think people need to know the actual reality of how it is to run a business, whether that's a property business, whether that's my social media is a separate business on its own. And I started 10 years ago with the plight to, number one, raise the flag and carry that flag for the good landlords out there, because we were still fighting back then, you know, oh, landlords are fat cats, so they do this and then don't contribute to society. It's not that much different now, to be honest with you, but it was my vision to try and be that person to say, look, not everyone's like that. Some are the good guys. And in order to do that, I needed a platform. And of course, Facebook was my first platform. It was free. It was relatively easy to use. And I didn't think it would do anything. So I set up a group, and I set a group called, back then it was called the HMO and Property Community Group, or I think it was called something like that, or the HMO Community Group. And back then on Facebook, they allowed you to forcibly add people into a group without their consent. Terrible, I know. But I needed some people to talk to. So I added 1,000 people because that was the limit. Half of them got really peed off with me and said, this is rude, I don't want to be involved, and left. But that left me with a base of 500 people. And I was posting, Neil, in that group 10 times a day, every day, without any responses, until eventually people started to talk back to me. People started to get engaged. And that group grew to 25,000 people, I think, in 2 or 3 years. And that was the catalyst. And that was really where it all started. I became that go-to back then, that go-to HMO person, and that person that was sharing all of that knowledge for free. And then I thought, well, okay, I'm spending a lot of time now on social media. I don't mind giving that knowledge away. How can I maximize this? How can I actually monetize my social media presence? And I'd heard about people that were making money by doing videos with ads, people putting ads in them like YouTube, only on Facebook. And I kind of got interested in that. So I started a page, because you can't monetize a Facebook group. Well, you couldn't then. And I started a page, and I remember I started a page, I had no followers. It was called Rick Gannon Property. And I was doing the same kind of thing, but just on a page now, which is a bit more global. It was a bit more open. And I just started posting videos. And I decided to do a regular live property news feed every morning at 9 a.m. And I did that for 5 years on my page to grow my audience. And I remember having 2,000 followers. That was all, hardly any engagement for 4, maybe even 5 years. And then literally overnight, a couple of years ago, I don't know what happened, but I went from 2,000 followers to 17,000 followers. And then I started to put 20,000 followers a day on my page organically. Wow. And I then got offered to be part of the Facebook creator community. It's like invite only. So I could start to monetize by ads and other elements that Facebook started to give me. And then I started to make money out of my content. So I was giving it away for free and nobody had to pay for it. It was still free, but Facebook were paying me directly. And then all of a sudden, it just went pop. So yeah, I mean, Facebook was the backbone of my business, because I became that go-to person that I didn't have to do any advertising. I didn't literally have to go out there and say, buy this, buy that. And people came to me organically because of the reach that Facebook gave me. And as I say, last November, I had over 100 million views in 1 month organically. And that's 100 million people that, I had to I mean, if you go onto my Facebook, you see that my private messages are all turned off. I can't answer it because it's just too busy. Yeah. So Facebook is now a 6-figure business on its own right. So because of the revenue that the ads bring in from that. So, that is a separate limited company. It is a big business. It's got a huge turnover. And, it's been the catalyst of everything. It really has. So then TikTok is kind of, well, if I can do it on Facebook, can I do it on TikTok? So I went over to TikTok and started to do the same thing, became quite successful very quickly. So between Facebook and TikTok now, I think about 800,000 followers organically, which is great. It means that people actually want the content. And then I thought, well, okay, if I could do it on there, I can do it on YouTube. So I'm kind of new on YouTube. I don't have a massive following on YouTube at the moment, something that I'm kind of breaking out into. But my main focus is Facebook and TikTok, and I like doing it. And they do say, don't they, that if you like doing something, it's not work, it's just fun. Yeah. And I just vlog everything. All I do is, if I go, I've got probably about 16 or 17 staff. I don't run all of the properties myself, although people see me on social media and think I do everything. I don't. I cherry pick a hat. I'll talk to my property manager on a Tuesday. We have a manager's meeting and I'll say, right, what's empty? What can I go in? What do we need to do? What can I use for content? And I go through a list and I pick certain properties and I go out there and record content. It's either tenants just left or a tenant's reported a problem. It's all real, apart from the couple of skit videos that I've done recently. And then I provide that content just to show people how it is out there, the good and the bad and the ugly. So if anyone's thinking about doing social media, it's like networking on steroids. You can go to a networking meeting and be in a room with 20 people, or you can do it online behind your desk and be in a room with millions of people, and get your message across out there globally. So it's a big thumbs up for me. Social media has been the backbone of everything I've done.
Well done, mate. 100 million views in 1 month. That's staggering, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy. Absolutely
Yeah.
crazy.
What
Yeah.
tips would you give to anybody that's trying to build their personal brand on social media?
You just got to keep going. Now, don't worry about followers and likes. They are really just trophies. You don't need followers and likes for people to watch your content. You just got to be consistent. It's almost like, for those of you that are listening, that maybe you watch something on YouTube, I can guarantee that you might watch somebody regularly on YouTube and you haven't even subscribed to their channel. You don't even actually click that button, but you go and you search for them. It's the same on social. It's the same on Facebook. People will watch your content. They won't necessarily engage at the moment with you. They won't necessarily click the like and the follow button, but they are watching you. And if you post content that people can relate to, my content's about renting houses and about the trials and tribulations of tenants, and there's a lot of tenants out there that can relate to the stuff that I post. So I get everybody that follows. And if you post relatable content, then people will watch it. And then people will start to reach out to you. What benefits does it give to property investors? I mean, I mentioned about, that in itself is a business. But in terms of my property business, I've had 2 joint venture partners from my social media profile, one of which we've made about 4 million quid together. That's come from social media. I get people that approach me that want to rent houses. I get tenants constantly approaching me wanting to rent property from me. I get people offering me deals. I get people wanting to join my property training company, my training program. It's everything. It's literally, it's a pathway to every last little piece of me.
Yeah.
If you like.
Well, if no one knows you, no one can work with you, right? So
yeah.
you're getting in
And
front
the
of
other thing
millions
is
of
as
people.
well, if you're at a networking meeting and, if you, let's say, for example, I was at a networking meeting, and every networking meeting will allow you to stand up and do a 30-second pitch without asking for money. So if I stood at a networking meeting and said, hey, my name's Rick Gannon, I'm a local HMO investor, and I'm working on too many deals at the moment, I can't cope with all of them. If you're interested in finding out how I do this and how you can get involved, then come and talk to me at the break, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then I might get approached by 3 or 4 people, and they might all give me a business card, and I'll reciprocate. What's the first thing they're going to do when they get back home?
The business card down.
They're going to Google me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
They're going to Google me.
True.
If they want to do business with me, they're going to go onto the internet and they're going to type in, who is Rick Gannon? And I know it's a sad sort of way we live right now, but you are what Google says you are.
That is the world, mate. Yep.
And the more content you put out on an open social media profile, then the more results and hits people will get when they type your name in.
Yeah.
And then you become credible, don't you? Because then you're an authority in the industry and people can see you, that you're posting regularly and you're actually doing this and you're at properties. And then all of a sudden, if you're competing with an investor or with somebody that you're looking to try and buy their property off them, and there's 5 of them and 1 of you, and they've got no social media profile, but you're all over the internet, then you're going to get the lion's share of business.
Gives you credibility and stance, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
And we'll finish on the training company as well. You've mentioned that a few times, Rick, and I'm guessing the social media presence helps people invest in the education themselves.
Yeah, it does. I mean,
what are you training people on?
So we only train on the strategies that we actually do. Again, for me, transparency, honesty, integrity, these types of values are they're sort of like intertwined in everything that we do as a group company. We've been training for probably 8 years, maybe 9 years, and we have a couple of programs. We've got like a 6-week academy, which is the foundations for people that are thinking about property, not quite sure what they want to do. And then we have a 12-month mentoring program that will help people get to the strategy that they've chosen. I only teach the things that I do, Neil, because again, for me, that's really important, because I know I do HMOs and I do them successfully. I know I do blocks of flats and do them successfully. And I know I can do serviced accommodation and holiday lets and do them successfully. So I train people in those strategies. I don't do anything else. We don't do flips. We don't do commercial conversions. We don't do new builds, etc. Because I know that I can do them and I'm very competent in those particular elements. So if anyone's looking for HMO type of training, essay, and MUFBs, as we call them over here, multiple unit freehold blocks, then yeah, I can help people do that. And we've been doing that for many, many years. Got many successful students, much of which a lot of people will know because they've got really big, large social media profiles now too. So yeah, it's a big part of our business, training. We have 2 groups every Tuesday night that I train, and then we have 1 group every Thursday, which is a whole day session that I train as well.
Yeah, great. I did a podcast a few episodes ago, it was probably a few months ago, and it was called The Journey of a Property Entrepreneur, how you build your own property portfolio, then you kind of set up the training company, then you get the books coming out, and you kind of ticked all the boxes for the multiple streams of income and how you can monetize the education and the knowledge that you've got.
Yeah, I think my books came first before the training, actually. One of the hardest things I've ever done is write a book, and now I've got 4. But the first book, my book, House Arrest, is a story. I don't even know why I haven't got one behind me. Here it is. I haven't set this background up for you, by the way, Neil. It's always like this. I'm not plugging but anyway, being as you mentioned. So this is my first book, House Arrest, and I wrote this more of an inspiration to my police colleagues, I think, because when you're in the police, you become institutionalized very quickly. And I didn't know then, and I still don't know now, a single police officer that ever says they love their job, ever. And they're always like, I want to do something else. What can I do? I can't do anything. I've got no transferable skills. So I thought, well, I'll put a book together, which is a story of how I left the police in that transitional period, how hard it was for me, and how I built my property business up and then never looked back. And that was really the whole point of this book. It doesn't mention any training courses in here. There's no upsell. There's no links to any websites. It was literally just a story. And it became very successful. I don't know where it sits in the charts at the moment. It's always in the top 20. And then I thought, well, after that, people started asking me for mentoring, and it wasn't really something that I considered. And I thought, well, I was giving so much information away online, and that was starting to take a lot of my time up, hours and hours a day. Then I thought, well, I can put this together in a room. So rather than helping individual people without a specific line to go down, a journey to follow with step-by-step process, it's always very piecemeal on the internet. It's always very, people jumping back into and without having a process to follow. So I thought, well, if I get a process together and put something together and then get, maybe 10 people in a room, then I can help more people, which I did. So I developed a whole blueprint, which we call Investor. That's my 12-month program, and started to put people, together in a room and do group mentoring. But of course, that does come at a cost because I can't do that for free, because it does take a lot of my time, takes a lot of resources. And that's now grown into a huge business and new era property training now. We've got a very good reputation of keeping it real. And that's really what I want to make sure that, we always put out there, that I will tell you exactly how it is, not how you want it to be, because it's important that you learn from my mistakes. And it's important that you know that property is not a get rich quick. It can be a get rich slow, but it will provide you with a very good sustainable monthly income that can allow you to leave your job. And if you go into it with your eyes wide open, and if you take education, because there are so many stumbling blocks that people, even if people, but it's all there on YouTube, is probably one of the biggest phrases that I get all of the time. Why would I pay when it's all there on YouTube? Well, it might very well be. But if you don't know what to look for because you're not educated, how are you going to look for it? How are you going to go in? How do you know what a Section 106 payment is if you've never heard of it before? So you wouldn't even go and search for that. How do you know what community infrastructure levy is if you've never heard of it before because you can't find it? How do you know about restrictive covenants if you've never been so all of these things that people would miss could end up giving you a criminal record, and they could end up making you bankrupt before you've even started. So that's the real importance of having a mentor that knows exactly what the process is, knows the things that can trip you up, and then guiding you around those potholes.
Yeah. And why learn from your own mistakes when you can learn from somebody else's?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. You'll excel your journey. You get that quicker. And you've got the support there as well next to you. Because I don't know what the statistics are, but, predominantly people that set up new companies and do it on their own, a lot of them will fail very quickly. If you've got someone there that's a mentor that can help you, that can guide you, then your chances of being more successful will be a lot higher.
Yeah. And you get access to a community as well. So if there's a group of people that are in your training course or your mentorship, you're around like-minded people. Proximity is power, and you all pull each other up along that journey too.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. We got
Rick,
a lot of our students will do business together and or fund each other's deals, or the community that we've created. I mean, we've got in my training community, we've probably got 6, maybe 700 students at the moment.
well done. Well done, mate.
Yeah,
Excellent. Well, Rick, it's been a pleasure catching up with you today, mate. We've been going for a while.
yeah,
And
it's been good. It's been
yeah, I
good.
feel like there was more stuff that we could keep talking about, but maybe do it again in the future, mate.
We'll do a part 2.
Part 2. Rick, Gannon, thank you very much for your time, mate, and wish you all the best.
Lovely. Thank you, Neil. Thanks for having me.
Join us again next week, team. And remember, every master was once a disaster. Every winner was once a beginner.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you tune in the same time next week so you can stay up to date with all cash flow positive property updates.